Today I'm upgrading the computer which I use to edit my videos. I figured I'd share my thoughts on my workflow and why I chose the components that I've chosen, in case it's helpful to those of you speccing out your next creator workstation build. So generally my workflow is as follows. I'll shoot a video for a client, I offload the footage onto my video production drive, which is an SSD in my computer. I'll then edit the video, export it, and I send the video to the client. They'll review it. They might have some small changes, so I'll make those amendments to the edit. And then after the project's signed off, I move all the project files to this backup drive, which is a larger capacity hard drive in the computer. Projects will sit here for a few days or maybe a week or two in case I need to quickly go back to those files or if I need quick access to them. Otherwise, I then move the whole project over to my NAS, which is network attached storage. In here, I have several large capacity hard drives, and on these drives is basically every video project that I've ever worked on. It's a Synology NAS, it's the D423 Plus. It has Seagate Red drives in there, which are optimized for NAS use. They're not the best drives, but they've been reliable enough for me in the 2 years that I've been running it. Eventually I will expand this and make it bigger as my needs grow, but for now I do have space on the NAS as it grows, so that's not a problem. I've got a good amount of headroom. And if you're going to run a setup like this as well, I should say you'd need a good router. So I'm connected wirelessly to my NAS. Yes, you can plug in, but our internet at home comes in the downstairs living room, whereas I'm working out of the second bedroom, which we've made into an office, which is the complete opposite side of the house and up one floor. So I didn't really want to run an Ethernet cable that distance, but from the performance with the aftermarket Wi-Fi antenna that I have and using this TP-Link AX53 router that we've got, yeah, we're getting really good performance, and I'm able to read and write to my NAS fairly quickly and even work from it. I can actually open projects that I stored on the NAS. If I was pulling up an old project and I was going to do some work on that for a few days, then I would pull it over and put it on my internal SSDs in my edit station. So for the last few years, I've been editing my videos with Premiere Pro with this computer. Inside, it's got an AMD Ryzen 7 5800X, a CPU that came out in late 2020. It has 32GB of DDR4 memory at 3600 MHz, an Asus Radeon 6700 XT graphics card with 12GB of VRAM, and it boots Windows 11 Pro from this crucial M.2 NVMe SSD drive. I keep my current video projects on this 4TB Samsung SSD, and then any projects that I've already finished, I move on to this 8TB hard drive. I edit and color grade my videos from this 10-bit Asus ProArt display, and I hear my audio through this Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 sound card, which is incidentally what I'm also using to record this voiceover. Overall, I've been happy with this setup, and I would have dreamed of a setup like this when I was a kid, but there's a few areas that I'd like to improve. I'm a freelance videographer and editor full-time, so when I earn money from my work, I try to reinvest some of that money in the equipment that I use in order to help me continuously improve my workflow and the videos that I make. Firstly, I wanted to cut down on my editing time, so I needed to speed up how my computer encodes and decodes video in real time. Whilst editing, your processor has to decode the signal from the footage that you filmed so that you can see it in your timeline preview. Depending on which format you've shot your footage in, whether it's H.264, 422 10-bit, ProRes or RAW for example, this affects how hard your processor has to work and directly impacts how responsive your timeline and video editing software feels. This is the preview window in my project timeline, which often stutters during playback whilst I'm editing, and it can sometimes take a little while to refresh. If I've got a lot of effects in there, sometimes the frame that I'm seeing isn't actually what the frame looks like, and I have to either click away from that clip or wait a few seconds for the frame to update. So this can really slow down my workflow and also break my focus. And this is what I want to improve with this upgrade to my editing workstation. The best way to improve this is a fast processor and fast storage drives for your project footage to be stored on, and ideally a separate fast storage drive exclusively for your media cache and scratch disks. This is where your editing software stores the data and video previews that it makes that you see in the timeline preview. And in fact, having fast dedicated storage just for media cache and scratch disks alone can massively improve your performance, because it frees up a lot of bandwidth on the PCI Express lanes, which is how your processor talks to all of these different drives and gives your edit software faster access to these files. Due to the new processor and storage that I'm going to be using, this meant I had to get a new motherboard as well. The board that I'm using currently has the AM4 AMD socket, which is a fairly old socket now. There's a lot of good processors on that platform, but it had to change. This board has two NVMe M.2 slots, one of which supports PCI Express Gen 5, whereas my old motherboard only has Gen 4 M.2 slots. So I'll keep my Crucial drive to boot Windows and to install software like Premiere, but this new Western Digital Black SN8100 SSD will serve as my media cache and scratch, and I'll probably throw a few personal files on there as well, because it's a really fast drive. It's definitely overkill, but if Premiere can access this drive for its media cache and scratch disks, it'll free up a ton of bandwidth, meaning in theory my editing should be a lot faster and smoother. As for the CPU, it was a tough choice, but eventually I went with the Intel Ultra 9 285K processor, which is on the socket LGA 1851. But originally I'd bought a different motherboard to use with the Ryzen 9950X3D on the socket AM5. Going from my old AM4 socket to AM5 seemed like a reasonable enough switch, and I've been happy with AMD. It's been a very good platform for me. Previous to this I was using the second gen Intel Core i7-2600K. That's a processor that came out, 14 years ago at this point. And I only upgraded it to the 5800X Ryzen 7 that I currently have 3 years ago. So that gives you an idea how long I made that processor last, and going to the 5800X was a great upgrade in itself. It was on a smaller nanometer process, which made it more power efficient. It had twice the cores and twice again the amount of threads, so it was a really worthy upgrade. So that's why originally I thought I'd naturally go for the 9950X3D, but after ordering I decided at the last minute to switch to Intel. I don't work with 3D software so much, I don't use Blender, and I don't really play video games that much these days. For the work that I do, the Ultra 9 285K and the 9950X3D perform very similarly when editing and rendering, but Intel has their dedicated hardware encoder and decoder, which they call QuickSync. It helps make the editing process smoother because you're not having to wait for those previews to be rendered in real time as much. And that's the main reason why I'm upgrading my computer. So I felt a little silly not opting for the Intel version with QuickSync when so many reviews online are talking about how much better the Intel option is for productivity. The 9950X3D is better for gaming and 3D applications, but for the software that I was using, Intel still felt like it was the better choice on paper. So for the RAM, I went with 64GB, and for most this may seem like overkill, but Adobe apps are really memory hungry and they'll pretty much use all of the memory that you give it. And I know this because I used to use a Mac when I used to work full-time at a previous company, and the Mac I had was 64GB, and yes, Premiere did often use at least 50 of that at any one time. So yeah, if whatever you've got, Adobe apps are known for just taking it. My old setup here had 32GB, where I'd reserved 28GB of that for Adobe, and thus 4GB for other apps like Chrome and whatever I might be using. Plus, I've heard of people experiencing stability issues when they have above 128GB of memory, so I figured 64 gigs, it's a decent upgrade for me. The memory's rated at 6000 megahertz, which is nearly double the speed of my previous, and it's on DDR5, not DDR4, so to be honest, it's going to be an upgrade no matter what I do. Apparently as well, the AMD Ryzen 9 9950X 3D has some kind of limit on the speed for memory, limited to 5400 megahertz. I'm sure there's ways around this, but I don't want to spend too much time tinkering and trying to fix things when the whole point of this upgrade is to save me time whilst I'm working. You know, so whilst I'm building this computer, this is time that I'm taking out of my working hours and time that I could be spending editing other projects. So, you know, I want to make this as quick and as seamless as possible. And while on Reddit and YouTube many people found stability issues when the Ultra 9 285K was first launched, getting a lot of blue screens, I also found a lot of people complaining about the 9950X 3D's CCD and how the processor is not really efficiently utilizing all of its resources. You may wonder why I didn't consider the 9950X just the standard version. By this point, I'd sort of made my mind to go back to Intel. A lot more creators are choosing the 285K today. Obviously, I'm just building this computer now, so I haven't had months of testing and daily use, but I figured it was worth it. For the graphics, I chose to go with the NVIDIA RTX 5080. The reason being is I've heard a lot about the 50 series having dedicated broadcast quality video encoders, which can be used in tandem with the CPU to improve editing and rendering. Also with DaVinci Resolve and Premiere Pro, these graphics cards support 10-bit 422, H.264 and 265 hardware acceleration, which is exactly what I need to achieve a smooth timeline. The 5080 draws more power than the 6700 XT that I'm currently using, so I'm having to swap out my power supply as well. I'm going from 750 watts to 860 watts, using the same brand of power supply so that I can simply unplug the modular cables out the back and swap out the PSU without having to redo all of my cable management. I'm going to install my old GPU first so that I can run a few tests for comparison before I install the new one. I've been using AMD graphics for a long time, mostly because their cards are generally cheaper but with a lot of video memory. So it'll be good to see how much of a render quality and performance benefit NVIDIA actually brings. I'm also gaining an extra 4GB of RAM, going from 12GB in GDDR6 to 16GB in GDDR7. I think the real benefit will be seen after I eventually switch to DaVinci Resolve, because that can utilise the graphics a little better than Premiere Pro. I've got a side note on the motherboard as well. So this motherboard is pretty much the same as the motherboard that I've come from. I went with an Asus model, and when I was gonna go with the AM5 chipset, again, it was basically the same motherboard, just with an AM5 socket, not an AM4. When I changed my mind last minute and went with Intel over AMD, I obviously had to return my AM5 motherboard and buy a new LGA 1851. But while Asus make the same board for either socket, where the Intel version has Thunderbolt, I think was the only real difference there is a difference in the antenna connectors on the Intel board. They use this clip mount system, which works great if you're using the included antenna for your Wi-Fi, which comes with the motherboard, because you can easily plug and unplug. I'm using a more beefy aftermarket antenna, which has better range and a longer cable, meaning I can position it closer to where my Wi-Fi signal is coming in. Now on the AM5 version of this motherboard, you have the threaded SMA sockets, which are completely compatible, industry standard. You just screw them on, and yes, it's a bit of a pain to unplug them, but usually you're not needing to unplug your Wi-Fi antenna, so I'm kind of fine with it being screwed on and pretty much fixed on there. But for some reason, Asus changed the design of the antenna on the Intel version, and going off pictures and YouTube videos where no one was really giving much attention to these antenna plugs, but they just looked different, so I didn't really know what to do. I was worried about getting my own antenna to work with this board, so I ended up buying these SMA adapters. They're made of copper, and SMA is the standard connection for this sort of thing. You find them a lot on Wi-Fi cards and also FPV drones as well. FPV drone pilots like to use these. But I've got to say, be careful, because they're a little confusing. You can get SMA male and female connectors, which, you know, you can imagine what those would look like. One has a collar, one has a sleeve, and they connect. But there's also the RP SMA, female and male adapters. And the RP stands for reverse polarity, meaning that basically the male and female connectors are actually the opposite. So the female has the pin and the male has the sleeve, which, you know, when obviously they connect together fine, but it means that if you have an SMA male and an RP SMA female, they're not going to work because they're actually the exact same. There's also the issue of making sure you've got the thread on the correct side. Is it internal? Is it external? Otherwise, you're not going to get a good connection. So, you know, when I'm looking at pictures online of this motherboard that I wanted to buy, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, what adapter I should buy, honestly, it was a real pain, and I was surprised that no one was really talking about it. I suppose most people are happy with the included antenna that comes with the motherboard, and if that's what you're using, then obviously that's fine. But for me, I want to use my aftermarket one. It's really good. So I figured I'd mention it here, and obviously if you're happy with the standard antenna, then that's absolutely fine and you needn't worry about it. Finally, here's a comparison of how my timeline performs in real time for encoding and decoding previews, which is directly correlated with how an edit feels and how the software feels and how the computer feels. So on the left is my old system running the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X processor, and with the media cache and the scratch disks on the same drive. In fact, they're in the same folder as the project file. On the right, you've got the new Intel 285K with the cache and the scratch disks separated onto this new Western Digital Gen 5 M.2 SSD. And I'd have loved to have done more of a controlled comparison where I would have compared just the processors before changing my scratch disks, or maybe had scratch disks before and after with the old processor and then the new. But to be honest, again, I just wanted to get my new build up and running as soon as possible with minimal downtime, and I need my computer for my profession. So, you know, whilst I'm doing this build, I can't do any editing. Okay, so here's a comparison of the difference in load between the old CPU and the new one. You'll notice that the 5800X is at 100% load, where the Ultra9 285K performed a faster render but only using 70% load. You'll notice that even though we've doubled the amount of RAM from 32 gigs to 64, we're only using around 60% of the RAM in both cases. And now here are the same tests for timeline scrubbing and rendering again, but with the new RTX 5080 GPU installed. I've got to say that this massively improved the performance. When I changed the CPU, I did notice a small improvement, but having changed the graphics, the difference in the timeline is night and day. There's a clip in the timeline here which has a speed ramp effect on it, and where previously this clip would cause choppy playback and even affect the clips after it to playback choppy whilst the graphics card caught up, the RTX 5080 seems to storm through and maintains playback speed without a noticeable drop in frames. So this will be due to the advanced hardware acceleration that we're seeing on the 50 series cards, and in fact the 5080 has 2 dedicated encoders and decoders, which is the same as the 5090, whereas if you're using a card like the 5070 or below, you're only getting 1 encoder. Video rendering is faster still, where this particular project could render 27% faster than with the old graphics card. Sadly, I can't run a Cinebench test on the 5080 because Maxon hasn't released support for this yet. And you might wonder why not go for the RTX 4090 because you get more video RAM. The thing is, in some other tests that I've seen from other users on Reddit and YouTube, the performance is actually less impressive with the 4090 in rendering and in real-time timeline scrubbing. For me, the real takeaway is how much more performance I felt after changing the graphics card over the CPU. I think back in the day, CPU was the main component in your editing workstation, but these days, editing software definitely utilizes the graphics card a lot more than it used to. I've got to say, I'm very surprised that the performance benefit between the Ultra9 285K compared to the older 5800X wasn't that huge. There is definitely a performance benefit, but there's a lot more performance benefit from the graphics card. If anything, it just goes to show that if you went with an older AMD Ryzen 7 whether you get a 5800X like this, or you go for like a 7800X or the 7950X, you're getting, to be honest, really good performance at these days a really good price point, especially if you're getting a used processor. So I think if you're a video editor on a budget today, you can build a very substantial editing workstation, providing you pair it with a good graphics card as well. I've been doing a ton of research into all the components that you've seen in this video, and in some areas it was quite difficult to get the information that I was looking for, so I figured if I share my thoughts, then at least you have another reference point. It's all very well talking about it from the spec sheet and going off benchmarks, but what is the real world usage and what's the real world experience? So thank you for watching, be sure to subscribe and all the usual, and I'll see you next time.